most terrifying knockout artist mixed martial arts has ever seen.
My name is Igor Vovchanchyn.
And this is a guy most
Igor Vovchanchyn.
He is thick and hard as nails.
Thick and hard as
Oh
what?
my God.
huge knee immediately.
Nah, I ain't gonna lie. Y'all told me to react to him. We here. So like, comments,
Knee protection there.
Oh my
knee to
God.
the face.
Huge knee immediately.
Nutter charges in and catches a knee right on the button.
Oh, look at that right hand. This guy is taking
Ooh.
down again.
Them bare hands too.
Oh, he goes down.
Stay down.
Oh, this is it, man. They should stop the fight.
Years
This
before
is
gloves
stop
were
the
worn,
fight.
before the takeover of Pride and the UFC, before fighting just once a night was a regular thing, ice-cold Igor Vovchanchyn racked up the longest unbeaten streak in MMA history, terrifying heavyweights from around the world while he did it as the most prolific knockout artist of the 90s. I'm Balian for MMA On Point, and this is the brutal story.
Shout out to MMA
of
On
Igor
Point, man.
Vovchanchyn.
We here finally. Y'all was commenting him, so we here.
Before we start, I want to give a big shout out to our friend and yours, Composer from X. Igor's early career was really hard to research and find, but between us, we've got pretty much all of his fight footage. Now, Composer's goated when it comes to MMA research. Drop him a follow and say big thank you to him. Let's get started.
Appreciate you, big brother.
Chapter 1, From Parts Unknown. The origins of Igor carry almost as much mystique as his knockouts, as Igor has said so much himself in the biography The King of Fighting, written by Daniel DiMarzio. I'll be sharing many details from this book where Dan compares Igor's life to something between Bloodsport and Rocky. Born in 1973 in a tiny Ukrainian village called Fesky, in a world of freezing winters and hard labor, where most kids ended up on a farm or in a factory, Igor instead chose neither. Ukraine has always stood between East and West. It's a land shaped by conflict, producing tough, unbreakable people, something we'd all come to know with fighters like Alexander Usyk carrying around that same
Alexander,
spirit,
one of them.
proud of the same soil that raised Igor. By 5th grade, though, Igor was already working with his hands in a brick factory. Honest yet grueling work that quietly built this raw strength that would later define him. And his escape from this mundane world was through fighting. At school, in the streets, even at home, it didn't really matter. He joined the Soviet school sports program, excelling in things like discus and shot put, before eventually finding boxing, at first being trained by his dad. But soon, his reputation grew so badass that apparently people around town would just start dropping out instead of facing him. He got really good at boxing, and after that he became obsessed with kickboxing, and by then Igor was dedicating his life to combat, training endlessly, obsessed with becoming the best fighter in the world. In just a few years in kickboxing, he racked up over 60 wins, earning himself enough to buy a VCR and a TV. Now this is back in 1992, a luxury for a village kid who had just once dreamed of a bicycle. I mean, VCRs had been banned in that part of the world after the collapse of the Soviet Union for fear of the information they might spread. But they were popular and hard to get as Western imports flooded the country, and Igor had all the latest stuff. By 1993, Igor proved his abilities on the world stage when he won the World Kickboxing Championship in Denmark, basically crowning himself one of, if not the best striker throughout Europe. It was after he won this title that he went out drinking with his friends, who rang the town bell, warning everyone to stay inside, which gave birth to a now legendary story that you might have heard, that the townsfolk would ring the bell every time Igor was on a rampage. From his dream as a child, though, Igor had already achieved so much of it, but his entire concept of combat sports was about to change, and it was all because of the circus. The Kharkiv circus came to town, and they put on a no-rules fight called The Honor of the Warrior. Now, Igor was immediately intrigued. He begged his coach, who was totally against the idea of a no-rules fight, but now already a kickboxing champion, Igor wanted to test himself. The idea of bare-knuckle fighting intrigued Igor, and he started researching karate methods to strengthen the knuckles, punching sand, anything he could find. And if you take a look at Igor's hands, he already had massive, massive fingers, and all that training only made him stronger.
He was a thick young fella, pause.
His first one-night tournament, the first of many, and it turned him into a human weapon. He didn't know who was going to fight, there were no weight classes, no gloves, and this was MMA, and he had to deal with grapplers. But this basically being no rules, he made use of some old school defense.
Oh! He said, I'm gonna put these feet on you.
And people learned very quickly you do not want to be underneath Igor Vovchanchyn. It seemed Igor's brutal style was suited perfectly to an MMA cage.
Bro, I ain't gonna lie, bro. They was ruthless back in the
30
day.
minutes later, Sergey Bondarovich
Headbutting
found
is
out also
crazy.
the hard way as he got dropped with one shot. It was all looking a bit too easy, like a... It was all looking a bit too easy, like a street fight
Yo, who
beatdown.
was
But in the finals of
Igor?
his first tournament, Igor saw the reality of MMA and one side of the game he had yet to truly learn.
What the fuck? Hold on.
Easy, like a street fight beatdown.
What
But
is
in
that?
the finals of his first tournament, Igor saw the reality of MMA and one side of the game he had yet to truly learn.
Grappling here. Oh! Oh!
He was going to have to learn to defend against the takedowns and the submissions coming his way, but at this point in his life, he'd never trained wrestling or grappling or anything resembling MMA before. He set out to find a Sambo coach.
Yeah.
Alexander Fedorov took him on as a student.
Alexander
He was the first world and
Fedorov.
European champion in Sambo, one of the greatest ever, and under his tutelage, Igor progressed quickly. Just 1 month later, he was signed up for tournament number 2, heading all the way to Moscow for a massive event, the Absolute Fighting Championship.
Live from Moscow, Russia.
Absolute.
Tonight, standing room only crowd of more than 11,000 fans.
AMC?
filled the arena to witness. Then no
I ain't never heard of this.
It was packed with fans, and a win here would put Igor at the top of a list of fighters to watch. And in the first round, he again absolutely flatlined his opponent.
Trying to set up the big overhand right. He's a very
Bomb!
See, down goes the opponent.
And these were the days
He
when
hit
not
with his
everyone was
palm, too.
well-rounded. Most people represented their martial
Not all the
art
time.
and
He
looking
do it
to prove
sometimes,
was
though.
superior.
Very excited about this match myself. Igor Vovchanchyn against Adilson Lima, one incredible kickboxer against a great jiu-jitsu man.
But faced with a difficult style matchup, Igor showed what also made him dangerous as a competitor, his patience. He waited for the inevitable level change and unloaded.
Nice punch. You see how he goes crazy. Beautiful punches by Vovchanchyn.
Oh!
Oh, a nice
Oh!
down goes Lima.
Head kick.
Oh, to the back of the
Head
head.
kick, sleepy.
Lima's out. Then comes the tap.
Fatality.
I'm glad, bro. Yo, I love y'all, bro. I gotta start, bro. Yo, I'm glad I watched him, bro.
Down goes Lima. Oh, to the back of the head. A kick.
Back of the head?
Oh, then comes the tap.
Back of the head, 2 front kicks to the face while he on the ground. They need to bring back this, bro. I will watch this live. I will pay a pay-per-view to watch fights like this, man.
Flurry. Down goes Lima. Oh, to the
Back of the
head.
head.
A kick.
Bam,
Lima's
bam.
out. Then comes the towel.
It was a brutal finish, one that very few fighters would have survived, but his opponent, a Gracie fighter, well, they wouldn't let it go without controversy.
His corner is complaining though. Robson Gracie feels that there shouldn't be a kick on the ground.
In an unthinkable move by today's standards, which we'll soon come to realize in the early 90s was very different, they let Lima immediately come back out to fight Igor again.
Unbelievable.
Fight him again.
This is the respect that these Brazilian fighters have here. Brazil should be very
He fought-
happy
it
with
came
this
out-
happening.
hold on, bro.
Oh, a nice overhand right.
I really like this kid. Really impressing me. But they stopped the match. It looks like Peter has a broken nose.
We're taking a look at
He thinks he won.
this fighter. He took some good shots there.
And his trainer Renzo Gracie said,
The fact that he just squeezing on it, bro, that's different type of, bro. Oh my God.
got a broken nose. He cannot continue.
I'm
He'd
soft.
proven he could beat
I'm
a
a softy.
BJJ black
Yeah,
belt.
I'm
But of
soft.
course, there was more to come that night, and it was time to put
I'm
those Sambo
soft.
skills to the test.
Ilyuhin, the Sambo fighter, fighting Vovchanchyn, the kickboxer. Ukrainian against Russia.
Mikhail will want to take his fighter down to the ground and try and use some sort of lock that he's used early on.
Ilyuhin, very calm, very together, experienced in this kind of match. And as I told you earlier, he fights for rings.
Mikhail wasted no time. He knew he didn't want to stand with Igor, and he took him right down.
Vovchanchyn pushing him off, able to get away, but now there it goes.
And the same submission came again.
Mikhail going for the
Yeah.
ankle lock. Could be a finish here. Vovchanchyn trying to do one of his own here.
Igor, though, looks like he still wasn't entirely sure what to do on the ground, and it was only a matter of time before Mikhail found the submission, the old chin to the eye submission, which is actually ironically made famous by Mark Kerr later. Igor had lost again in the finals, defeated by a Sambo master with techniques he just didn't have time to learn yet. But make no mistake, this was just the beginning of Igor's long and brutal campaign. He instead dedicated himself to mastering grappling arts and went away for 2 months focusing on nothing else. And when he returned to compete in the 1996 Saikai Strongman tournament in Belarus, he looked better than ever.
Oh, sleep him.
Another flawless one-punch knockout. Belarus, he looked better than ever. Another flawless one-punch knockout, and in the next round, he looked even more dangerous. Many of these guys were traditional martial artists, and they had no idea what they were in store for that night when Igor walked into the arena. He'd made the whole tournament look effortless, and he was crowned the Saikai champion, winning his first one-night event. He hadn't really used any of his new grappling though, so that question was left a bit unanswered. But he told his manager, "I will literally fight anyone, anywhere, anytime." It only took another 2 months for Igor to sign up to another tournament, this one called the Ukrainian Octagon. Igor would yet again make a statement, scoring 3 more back-to-back knockouts.
Bomb! Oh!
And in the finals, you could see his takedown defense improving. These fights were hardly giving Igor a challenge, but he was willing to fight anywhere. That was made clear when he got an invitation to do something crazy, come to a Ukrainian prison and fight one of the influential prisoners there. Apparently the money was so good he had to say yes. So he went in and fought and beat this guy. Apparently all the inmates gave him homemade shanks as presents to take home afterwards.
What?
Igor's first steps into the MMA world were already legendary amongst the fans that were following it, but seemingly even amongst his own people, the man was fast becoming a national hero. One that would inevitably inspire future generations of fighters, not unlike Usyk. Chapter 2, the human freight train. By just 22 years old, Igor had won 3 one-night tournaments.
22?
Then in March 96, he got an even bigger opportunity when the IFC came to Ukraine, bringing some of the biggest heavyweights from around the world to compete. Apparently, Igor and his friends stood by and watched the likes of Paul Varelans and Fred Floyd, these massive Americans, get off the bus, all of who towered over Igor, who was just 5'9". And according to Igor's autobiography, it was at this moment his buddy turned to him and said, "I do not like this. Run before these guys kill you." Igor though understood that in the tournament, not only would he be underestimated, but the fans would cheer even harder for an underdog.
Welcome again to International Fighting Championships. We're inside Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. A packed house, 16,000 here at the National Sports Palace.
You're going to see more action net here than you've ever seen in your life. Punching, kicking, grappling, wrestling, kung fu, taekwondo. You're going to see it all right here in the cage.
At ringside would be the man who is the king of Pancrase. That is a martial arts in Japan.
Ruined. I'm gonna watch, bro.
Rutten out of Holland, no rules.
I ain't gonna lie, I'm gonna watch just straight Pinterest Baz Rutten highlights, but we got to, bro. We don't watch the doc. He's the GOAT. One of the GOATs.
Anything goes.
Man, you'll be everywhere, bro.
Preliminary fight.
In every
rules, of
video,
course,
bro.
In this case, no biting, eye gouging, fish hooking, but also no rounds.
No rules. Anything goes.
The bracket put Igor against one of the biggest competitors right
No
off the bat,
rounds?
Fred the Mangler Floyds, 340 pounds, 6'4",
What is
and
this?
a PKA kickboxing champion. Also a movie star who towered over Igor with over 130 pounds difference.
The Mangler. The way I got that name is one of my opponents. I beat him so bad that his own manager couldn't recognize him after I pulverized his face.
Fred came at Igor from the opening bell.
Fred Floyd, who goes right after him. Wow! Fister just flying all over, a knee to the side.
Oh, shit. Ow!
They are not going to grapple on this one.
Get
Igor
right
was
with him,
landing good
then.
punches, but it became a real war of attrition.
Fred Floyd takes him in and around America. Pad spot shots from the Fresh Prince. He's in the best position.
Get right then.
Igor continued to circle and chop away at Floyd's legs, waiting for his moment. He was even constantly stance switching, something you didn't really see back then either.
Martial arts in Japan.
Oh.
Right now, what?
Don't grab me. Don't grab me.
The foot fight.
The crowd was going crazy for Igor as Fred started to slow down.
And it looks like the Mangler's getting a little tired.
Guys go on to the semifinals. Again, another knee to the groin from Floyd.
It was a phenomenal spectacle, and Igor kept pushing and pushing until he broke Fred Floyd.
Great foul.
Oh!
Almost to the again, no time limit. So these
Oh
guys
my God!
Or submission. And right
He throwing bolts. Oh!
going away with the right hook. This time with the left. He is tapped out. Fred Floyd.
Igor putting paws on Buddy I'm talking about his hands fast too. Igor was throwing them fast. He faster than what I thought.
Overcoming an opponent much bigger than him did not go unappreciated. But if the fans thought Fred Floyd was big, he was now about to take on the polar bear, Paul Varelans. This guy's size alone could give people problems at the time, and he'd even made it to the finals of some early UFC tournaments. He dwarfed the Ukrainian, and this is long before most fans knew that skill can beat size if you knew how to use it. Igor had just gone to war for 13 minutes as well, and now had to deal with an almost entire foot in height disadvantage. But apparently, to everyone's surprise, Igor laid down backstage and took a nap to restore some energy. And when the bell started, he came out blasting.
No rules fight.
Oh!
Vovchanchyn going right at Paul Varelans.
Let's run it back.
No rules fight. Vovchanchyn going right at Paul Varelans, trying to tie him up.
Hit Paul Varelans, whatever his name is, better block.
Go. In this fight especially, Igor was a master of range, sliding back and dropping the hammer every time.
It looked like Igor Vovchanchyn.
Oh, in the front, get to the body. He nice with it. I ain't gonna lie.
Hammer every time.
It was really front, get to the body.
It looked like Igor Vovchanchyn, despite the fact he went 13 all time.
Varelans basically became a punching bag until he just couldn't take any more of Igor's sledgehammers. The crowd, oh my god, the crowd went mental.
The Ukrainian people here inside the National Sports Palace have simply gone nuts.
Can you imagine? In front of his own people. To
That's
some fans,
crazy.
the size would have seemed impossible to overcome.
That's crazy. He was beating Buddy up bad, though. He was beating him up
And
bad.
Varelans already had UFC and international experience. I mean, the crowd just lost their minds. But in the finals, Igor would now face John Dixon, a 6'1" kickboxer with a record of 16-0, 16 KOs, a very powerful and technical striker
Look
just
like
like
he just-
Igor. Another advantage Igor had, though, not being as big as these guys, was his cardio and recovering between fights. He used that to his advantage.
Both these guys have had very little time to rest in between their bouts.
Immediately, you could tell it was going to be way more technical, and Dixon was even throwing John Jones-style oblique kicks. He rushed in for the takedown and caught Igor.
All right, John goes for the takedown on knee to
Oh!
John going all the way right and left. He has Igor Vovchanchyn stabled back just a bit. And now Igor Vovchanchyn goes after John.
But it was Igor's speed and his cardio that was starting to work for him.
Boy, this is one of the best fights ever. I think pretty much this is, again, another nice left by the Ukrainian these guys will ever have after leaving.
Dixon has to move. It's over. Dixon ran out of gas. He ran out of gas.
Igor had won another tournament, but not just that, was the IFC champion after a fantastic night of fights in his home country in front of his own people. This event broke Igor onto the international stage. Overnight, he became a legend to many, but would you believe it? Apparently, he never got paid. Not a surprise, though, if you know the history of the IFC. Take a closer look at their promotion. They were basically ripping off the UFC, even their logo. The real UFC had threatened legal action before the event had even taken place.
The ILC. Dang, he wasn't even getting paid. That's insanity.
And the promoter Buddy Albin had tried to put on a similar event in Georgia in the US, but SCG accused him of trademark infringement and false advertising, which it was. This wasn't the UFC. In fact, Albin got chased off, and then he went to the Russian mob and told them he owned the UFC international rights and they could put on a show. Once they found out the truth, Buddy ran off again, and the likes of Igor never got paid. But don't forget as well, this was Igor's third tournament this month. 9 fights in 1 month, all by finish. Worldwide, they were now giving
9 fights in 1 month, all by finish. Bro, you would never see this again ever, bro. This is 1 of 1, bro. We'll never see it again.
him nicknames. In the US, they called him the Wasp or the Ukrainian Freight Train. Since his kickboxing days, he was also given a new name, though, worldwide. Ice Cold. The emotionless state in which he fought, like knocking out giant men, was just another day at the office. But soon, he'd get another name from another international audience. The perfect weapon of the North. Chapter 3,
The fact that he
longest
wasn't
win
getting
streak
paid is
in MMA.
crazy.
Igor was now a big enough star and draw that he didn't really need to be fighting in tournaments anymore. His win streak was 14, 6 straight KOs, 1 submission, and the rest just vicious TKO beatdowns. In May 1997, he was matched up with his first super fight against Leonardo Castello Branco in Moscow, and it turned into an absolute spectacle. Branco was a BJJ black belt, and in this fight, he really tested Igor's ground game, determined to find a weakness in the armor. And he put Vovchanchyn in some really bad spots. But when he got back on top though, the crowd went crazy. This back and forth war continued for 30 minutes and then 5 minutes of overtime with neither man quitting or giving in. It actually went the distance and it would be called a draw. For Igor, it was the first time he'd ever been to a decision in MMA. The same promotion gave him a call though to come back and compete in the AF Russian Open Cup, and once again Igor plowed through everyone on his way to another one-night tournament victory.
Overhand. Wop, wop, wop.
It was obvious that around Russia and Ukraine, Igor was almost untouchable.
That dude said, hold on. Hold on 1 minute, hold on.
That
leg can't hurt.
But over in Israel, there was another massive night of fights about to take place. The first Absolute Fighting World Pancration Cup was going down, and they flew Igor all across the world to compete. Brackets in this tournament were going to be tough, but his first bout against Valery Pliev, a Russian Sambo fighter, ended with Igor taking top position and destroying him in just 7 minutes.
Now he leans up. Nothing really connecting. Off the top of the head. There's one that slipped in on the mouth.
That was a beautiful shot.
I'm not sure if a tap, sliding with an elbow, and you saw the tap out there.
But the next round of the tournament would be anything but easy. Semenov, the Sambo expert, had shown early on in the night that his top game was relentless.
Semenov, a very, very difficult guy, high up on, choked out his opponent.
This fight was extremely technical, with both guys respecting what the other brought to the table.
All right, both fighters very cautiously feeling each other out here.
Amazed here in the holds bar. There's the attempted takedown.
Boom, and a great reversal. Look at this.
Okay. Oh!
Right hand.
Yeah.
And there he goes again. Semenov trying a double leg takedown.
Sprawl dummy.
Oh, nice knee.
So far so good for Igor, but once a Sambo specialist got him on the ground, it was a different story.
Igor trying to go.
Nice takedown.
He put crushing pressure on Igor, chipping away with ground and pound, and when it looked like Igor might get up,
Vovchanchyn trying to get back on his feet. Semenov trying to keep him on his back.
Great left hand. Tries a reversal.
He did try and push off and go. Semenov, nice shots.
the fight went the full distance after a 35-minute war.
I would beg our viewers to try to hold their hands up. Just hold them up for 30 solid minutes.
Yeah.
And they'll get very, very heavy.
When the final bell sounded, they gave Igor the victory. But the only problem was his opponent in the finals was the very respected Nick Nutter. Nick was an NCAA American wrestler and champion who just started MMA but was undefeated and looked incredibly dominant, using his takedowns and headbutts to win fights brutally, both of them in less than 5 minutes that night.
I was sitting there watching him, struggle for 35-0. I was chilling back there, drinking iced tea and watching him get tired, thinking I'm going to crush. And he was little,
he was little.
Nick took Igor down, crushed him against the fence, and started dropping relentless knees to his face.
Igor Vovchanchyn, that's a vicious knee. 3, 4. We can both count. Look at that, another one.
The ref even stopped to see if Igor was still conscious, which he was, and he wanted to keep going. But it looked bad, like permanent damage. The commentators couldn't believe that Igor wouldn't quit after already going 35 minutes that night. But after another 24 minutes of action, Igor was still conscious and not giving up, and he found a really creative way to end the fight.
Comes underneath with a headbutt.
Oh, nice. Really teach you in any school, whether it be...
Nick Nutter has tapped out.
That's it, people. Oh, my God.
The announcers spoke about his fighting spirit and how they'd been all over the world and not seen a man like him. One of the biggest tournaments at the time happening outside of Europe and the Middle East.
Hold on. Did this nigga just go up and under and hit him? Bro, what? What did I just watch?
Was going going down in Brazil. Their rich Vale Tudo history had evolved into the World Vale Tudo Championships, and they had phenomenal fighters like Marco Ruas, Pedro Rizzo, and even future opponent Mark Kerr. WVC 5 rolled around a few months later, and they extended an invitation to fly Igor all the way to Brazil. It's also here in Brazil, according to his biography, that he'd meet the legendary Elio Gracie, where he told him he respected his family's art and grappling. Apparently, Elio shook his hands and said, "If I had hands like yours, I wouldn't even bother grappling." WVC 5 was set to be a big international performance for Igor, with competitors being flown from all around the world. It was kind of a Brazil versus the world style card, and of course, again, he'd have to get through 3 opponents in one night.
Welcome to Recife,
They doing a lot of
Pernambuco, a city known as a Brazilian Venice. Here from the Golden Beach Hotel, home of Vale Tudo Championship number 5.
But make no mistake, even with the show being in Brazil, it was all about ice-cold Igor Vovchanchyn.
And this is a guy most of these people are here to see. And this man is awesome.
And definitely one of the favorites to win the show here tonight.
Igor had the Brazilian Tulio Palhares in the opening round, but once again, Nick Nutter was also in the tournament, and on the opposite end of the bracket, which would lead into an inevitable rematch in the finals. And Nick just smashed his first opponent as well.
Nutter is just so powerful here. I don't know what Carvalho can do in this position.
There's another shot, and a huge right hand
Big
attack.
right hand.
This is over. It is over immediately.
Here he was once again walking into another one-night bare-knuckle tournament with 30-minute rounds on a 23-fight unbeaten streak. The hype was absolutely
23
insane.
fights. Damn.
Harris takes his man down.
Nice takedown.
Double leg takedown. He took the bigger man down. Igor is just sitting there, and he takes a knee right in the groin.
Once Igor was back up and moving, he broke his opponent in the first round pretty quickly.
Men, they're in great shape because they're not breathing very heavily. That was my question about Tulio Palhares coming in, taking his fight at the last moment. What kind of shape when he quits?
That's it.
And this is also where the stories of Mark Kerr and Igor were linked together for the first time.
Mark, what?
Mark Kerr, and you had Mark coming out there. This is crazy.
You here to hopefully I'm gonna fight for the WBC.
Look at the girl. Look at that girl behind him.
Around this year. So I love Brazil. I love the Brazilian people. They love the fighters more than in America.
Kerr wanted to fight anywhere but the US at this point, stuck in a 6-month legal battle with SEG over his UFC contract, basically draining his life.
SEG Sports says I breached the contract with them, so they took me to court, and I'm in the middle of trying to get free to fight down in Brazil and over in Japan. Yeah, I want to come down here and fight, and I want to come down here and show my skills to all the people here.
If Mark wasn't tied up, we may have seen him in the tournament that night, maybe even taking on Igor. They were already on a collision course.
As soon as he took off his shirt, look at it. Watch it. Check it.
If Mark wasn't tied up, we may have seen him in the tournament that night, maybe even taking on Igor.
Okay.
They were already on a collision course, and it was already being talked about as one of the fights of the decade. The semis rolled on, and Nick Nutter brutalized Paul Varlins.
Varlins in that, not there though. That one got through. Paul Varlins is cut.
That one split the eye open very nicely.
Blood is just streaming out of his face, and that's it.
Look at the blood all over his face. He took some good shots. Very angry at himself.
If Igor wanted to continue his momentum, he needed to come out on top in this tournament, especially with Kerr cage side.
The devil coming right at Vovchanchyn.
Vovchanchyn now trying to take his opponent to the mat. Oh, a huge left hand.
These guys.
Oh, he just takes a left hand to the jaw and then throws his opponent down.
But did you see Vovchanchyn flinch? No. That's the scary part about this guy.
Igor, though, eventually got on top and just kept dropping right hands until the Brazilian couldn't take any more.
Oh, little
big
short
right hand.
rights, yep.
Yeah, those are getting in and those are hurting. Again, this guy hits so hard, and that's it.
It was a tough battle on the feet, but of course, Igor had one more opponent if he wanted to win the tournament, and it was a rematch from the last finals, Nick Nutter.
But we do have our final. It's called Revenge, and boy, it couldn't be more appropriate.
Nick came out full of confidence, Mark Coleman in his corner
Nick
after
Nutter.
spending 8 months
That's
dreaming about the
that's a
rematch
hell of a
Igor
name.
and how he was going to beat him. But Igor apparently had been doing the same. And if you doubted the fight IQ of Igor at any point in this video, watch what happens next.
Knee protection there, and
oh my God!
Huge knee immediately.
Nutter charges in and catches a knee right on the button.
Boom! One knee, one shot, and the fight was over.
On some damn, what's his name? On some
Fight IQ of Igor.
Damn, I forget his
watch
name.
what happens next.
Scarface.
Knee protection there, and
oh my God!
I know what I'm talking about.
Huge knee immediately.
Nutter charges in and catches a knee right on the
Oh, hey, Masvidal. That's what I'm talking about.
One knee, one shot, and the fight was over.
A knee from
People
heaven.
were
Come here.
shocked. This
Oh,
was
he's
supposed to
asleep.
be
He did. He
incredibly
gone.
competitive, and Igor ended it in 17 seconds. He had now won 7 one-night tournaments. And after Brazil, there was only one place left for him to truly break into another level of stardom. He was heading to Pride in Japan.
Oh, Pride. Oh, yeah.
At Pride 4, they called him in to take on Gary Goodridge with Mark
here for it.
Sakuraba and Hickson Gracie all on the card. And Igor's thunderous TKO announced his arrival amongst the biggest stars in the world.
Another big
Bum.
left hook by Igor Vovchanchyn. And Garrett turns his back.
Why did he
And the
show
referees
it?
wave the fight off.
The Japanese fans dubbed him the perfect weapon of the North. Igor did return to WVC after this for 2 more super fights though, and in both of them he put on more demolition jobs.
But I think he has a little bit of fear
I'm
of Igor's
afraid.
power.
I'm sitting there.
Don't run. He's scared.
Yeah, that's it.
Bum. Bum, bum. Bum.
Elbow. How complete is the guy? You know?
And by this point the Brazilian crowd loved
He
him.
made everybody tap out, bro. Everybody.
This guy is taking some out again.
Give
What
up.
a punch, man. Jesus Christ. And he stands up again. Amazing. Oh, this is the 3rd time he goes down.
Stay down, man.
Oh, this is it, man. They should stop the fight.
Back in Pride, and he would fight to a decision with Akira Shoji before traveling back to Ukraine one last time and for one more one-night tournament where he'd again come out on top, making it 8 tournament wins and now
How many-
32 wins in a row.
He might be the best, like, martial artist of all time, bro. When you ever seen a martial artist, that means kicking, wrestling, punching. 30 straight wins, but they usually lose. It's hard. Now, boxers might be different, but
All of this culminated in September 1999 at Pride 7, a focal point of the Smashing Machine as Igor was matched up with Mark Kerr for the first time.
What?
To some, it was a meeting of the 2 greatest martial artists to ever live. And now I'm sure you realize, as a Ukrainian himself, just how important and special of a role it truly is. And it's absolutely no surprise Usyk stepped up to play Igor, a complete legend
Nah,
of
that's
the
hard.
sport. Usyk himself was 13 years old at the time, living in an area where Igor was a national hero. Although he never spoke publicly about it, as far as I can tell, he very well may have been watching, because every other combat sports fan around the world certainly was. This was truly
That's
a matchup
hard.
of epic proportions, and of course is made out to be in the movie as well, but can you imagine? You got Mark Kerr, he's 10-0, the biggest, dangerous, most looking human ever to live, world grappling champion as well as MMA, and he's going up against ice-cold Igor with a 32 fight unbeaten streak. Mark got on top, ready to drop the kind of ground and pound that melted most men. But this was Igor Vovchanchyn we were talking about.
oh!
But suddenly, Mark was looking very, very tired and just laying on Igor. And then, in an instant, by now we all know how heavy the shots of Igor are, heavy enough to stop any man. Originally, these knees made it a TKO win, but
That's
it was
crazy.
declared earlier that knees to the head in that position were not allowed, and it was
What?
turned into a no contest. And is really the start of where the Smashing Machine documentary takes you. What should have been an amazing achievement was immediately marred in controversy. Igor should have been DQ'd. Igor would later tell Russian press that he wasn't entirely sure, as the rules had indeed just shifted, but he also said it was on the ref to stop the fight after the first illegal shot, rather than let it continue. Now, we've only been talking about Igor's MMA career, because it's fair to say 2 months after that, he took a fight with legendary Dutch kickboxer Ernesto Hoost in K1, and the Dutch specialist would hammer Igor apart with leg kicks in the closing round.
Oh! Them leg kicks hurt. Them leg kicks hurt.
But his unbeaten streak in MMA ran all the way to 38, although different websites have it listed different in different places. But I'm going with Topology, and it was at the time and for many years the longest win streak in MMA history. But sadly, it all came to an end at the Pride 2000 Grand Prix, where after beating Otsuka, Gary Goodridge again, and eventually even Sakuraba, he ran into Mark Coleman in the finals.
Mark
the victory would have made it
Coleman.
10 tournaments won for Igor, but somehow, almost impossibly, in truly one of the greatest comeback and underdog stories in the sport's histories, after 4 losses in a row, something just took hold of Mark Coleman in that tournament, and getting revenge for both Nick Nutter and Mark Kerr, he just refused to be beaten.
Yeah, see, that's why we gotta watch Mark Coleman. I gotta watch him now, bro. Y'all been telling me to watch Mark Coleman, though. It's coming. He's coming sooner than y'all think. He made him tap out.
Although the win streak was now
He made him tap out? Igor will never tap out.
Nick Nutter and Mark Kerr, he just
Made him
refused
tap?
to be beaten.
Oh, shit.
Although the win streak was now officially over, it would never be forgotten. Although Igor's story is wrapped up with Kerr's in the Smashing Machine, the reason the heavyweight champion has taken on the role is because of the sheer legendary achievements that have stood the test of time. Igor's win streak was then, as it is now, completely unheard of, let alone the fact that so much of it was bare knuckle and one-night tournaments. Of that era, he was absolutely one of the best fighters in the world and could have beaten anyone on any given night. Igor himself told Ukrainian media that having Usyk play him in the movie was a pleasant surprise, and he'd followed his career and watched all his fights on TV. That Pride tournament victory would truly have made him immortal, but there was also this lingering injustice. Igor had already fought twice that night, whilst Coleman had earned a bye after Fujita had pulled out. It meant Igor had to fight harder and more than Coleman that night, who was comparatively fresh. Had both men marched with the same gauntlet, perhaps it would have been a different result. Igor's spirit, though, didn't fade. Even defeat him for the rest of his career, he proved himself world class. His losses were exclusively only to the elite. In later years, he'd clashed with Enson Inoue, ran through a rematch with Mark Kerr, battled Quinton Rampage Jackson, even went toe-to-toe with Mirko Krokop and many other heavyweight KO artists. He was also the first fighter to truly carry Ukraine onto a global stage, and it's another reason that Alexander Usyk was most likely willing to step into his shoes, a man who now represents his country at the absolute highest level of combat sports, and who knows, perhaps will match Igor's unbeaten record. Igor is undoubtedly, though, an inspiration not just to Usyk, but many fighters from that part of the world. Honestly, his role in this film is almost like the passing of a torch from one invincible force to another, a continuation of an era of Ukrainian heavyweight dominance and knockouts. There will never be another man like the perfect weapon of the North. The sport has moved on from its Wild West days of bare-knuckle one-night tournaments, but the legend will be kept alive.
The perfect weapon of the North, man. I ain't even gonna lie to y'all, man. I ain't gonna lie to y'all. Igor? The fact that he fought Mark Kerr, he fought Mark Coleman, just Rampage Jackson, Mirko Krokop, he fought all the legends. That's insane, bro. That's insane. I'm glad y'all put me on, bro. I'm actually glad y'all told me about this dude, bro. He's insane. Like, comment, subscribe, though, man. Let me know in the comments I want to discover next, react to next. Mark Coleman is coming, trust me. I'm going to see y'all next one, man. No cap.